June 18, 1862. Seven Pines, Virginia, dawn. A strange sight appeared over the Union lines. Rising slowly into the morning sky was an enormous balloon made of silk painted in bright colors. Hanging beneath it in a wicker basket was a man with a telescope. His name was Thaddeus Lowe, and he was about to do something no one in human history had ever done in war. He was going to spy on the enemy from the sky. As the balloon rose higher, Lowe could see everything. The Confederate fortifications, the artillery positions, the troop concentrations, he could count regiments. He could see where they were moving. He could watch them in real time and telegraph what he saw directly to Union commanders on the ground. For the first time in warfare, one side could see what the enemy was doing from above. For the first time, there were no secrets on the battlefield. For the first time, a general could know exactly where the enemy was and what they were planning. The Confederates stared up at the balloon in frustration and fear. They shot at it with rifles. They fired artillery at it, but it was too high. The bullets fell short, the cannonballs missed, and Thaddeus Lowe kept watching, kept reporting, kept giving the Union an advantage the Confederates could not match. This is the story of the Union Army Balloon Corps, Lincoln's Air Force. The first spies in the sky, a story of innovation, courage, and the birth of aerial warfare. Welcome, friends. When we think about the Civil War, we think about infantry charges and cavalry raids. We think about ironclad ships and telegraph lines, but we do not usually think about hot air balloons. Yet for 2 years during the Civil War, the Union Army operated the world's first military air force. The Balloon Corps, 7 balloons, 12 men operating from Virginia to Mississippi, flying reconnaissance missions, directing artillery fire, changing how warfare was fought. It was a revolutionary idea. And like most revolutionary ideas in the military, it faced enormous resistance. Conservative generals did not trust it, bureaucrats did not want to fund it, soldiers did not understand it, and the man who invented it, Thaddeus Lowe, had to fight not just the Confederates but his own army to keep his balloons in the sky. Today we are going to tell the story of America's first Air Force. The story of a showman who became a military pioneer. The story of how balloons changed the Civil War, and then were forgotten for 60 years. If you love these stories of innovation and the stubborn men who pushed them forward against all odds, I hope you will subscribe to our channel. We are building a community here to keep these memories alive. Now, let us go back to 1861, to a country at war and a balloonist with a crazy idea. Background: Lowe was born in 1832 in New Hampshire. He had almost no formal education, but he was brilliant, ambitious, and obsessed with flight. From a young age, Lowe was fascinated by balloons, not as toys but as tools, as transportation, as for the future. In the 1850s, Lowe became a professional aeronaut. He built balloons, he gave demonstrations, he took paying customers on flights. He became famous as Professor Lowe, though he had no academic credentials. But Lowe had a dream. He wanted to cross the Atlantic Ocean in a balloon. From America to Europe, no one had ever done it. Most people thought it was impossible. Lowe built an enormous balloon. He called it the Great Western. It was designed to carry enough gas and supplies to make the journey. He planned to launch in 1861. Then the Civil War began. Lowe was in South Carolina on April 20, 1861, making a test flight of another balloon when he was caught in high-altitude winds and blown far off course. He landed near Unionville, South Carolina, deep in Confederate territory. The locals thought he was a Union spy. They nearly lynched him. Lowe had to talk fast, explain who he was, and prove he was just a balloonist. He barely escaped with his life. He made his way back north, and he started thinking, if he could fly over South Carolina by accident, what if the Union Army could fly over Confederate positions on purpose? What if balloons could be used for reconnaissance? What if the Union could see what the Confederates were doing from the sky? Lowe took his idea to Washington, selling the idea to Lincoln. In the spring of 1861, Thaddeus Lowe arrived in Washington, D.C. with an audacious proposal. He wanted the Union Army to create a balloon corps, a fleet of observation balloons that could spy on Confederate positions. He would build the balloons, he would train the operators, he would revolutionize warfare. The problem was nobody in the army believed him. Generals were skeptical, balloons were toys, carnival attractions. How could they be useful in war? But Lowe had a powerful advocate. Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, Joseph Henry. Henry was one of America's leading scientists. He understood the potential of aerial observation. He introduced Lowe to President Lincoln. Lincoln was fascinated. Lincoln loved technology. He was the only president ever to hold a patent. He understood innovation. In June of 1861, Lowe gave a demonstration for the president. He launched a balloon from the grounds near the White House. He ascended 500 feet into the air, and from the balloon's basket he sent a telegraph message directly to the White House. It was the first air-to-ground telegraph message in history. The message read, "This point of observation commands an area nearly 50 miles in diameter. The city with its girdle of encampments presents a superb scene. I have pleasure in sending you this first dispatch ever telegraphed from an aerial station." Lincoln was sold. He ordered the army to give Lowe a chance. In August of 1861, Lowe was officially appointed chief aeronaut of the Union Army Balloon Corps. He would build balloons for military reconnaissance. He would operate them in the field. He would prove that aerial observation could change warfare, or he would fail and be forgotten. Building the Balloon Corps. Lowe got to work immediately. He designed and built 7 balloons specifically for military use. They were enormous. The largest, called the Intrepid, held 32,000 cubic feet of gas. It could lift a basket with 2 observers plus telegraph equipment to an altitude of several thousand feet. The balloons were made of silk coated with varnish to make them airtight. They were expensive. Each balloon cost several $1,000s, an enormous sum in 1861. But Lowe promised they would be worth it. The balloons were named the Union, the Intrepid, the Constitution, the United States, the Washington, the Eagle, the Excelsior. Each balloon was transported with a gas generator. This was crucial. You could not just show up to a battlefield with a deflated balloon. You needed a way to inflate it on site. Lowe designed portable hydrogen generators. They produced hydrogen gas by mixing iron filings with sulfuric acid. The reaction generated hydrogen, which was piped into the balloon. It took several hours to inflate a balloon, but it could be done in the field. Lowe also designed special wagons to transport the balloons and equipment. Everything had to be mobile. This was an army, not a carnival. He recruited and trained a team of aeronauts, men who would pilot the balloons, operate the telegraph equipment, and observe enemy positions. By the end of 1861, the Balloon Corps had 12 men. And then they went to war. First combat use. The first significant military use of Lowe's balloons came in September of 1861 near Arlington, Virginia. Union forces were facing Confederate positions across the Potomac. Generals wanted to know where the Confederate artillery was positioned, where their fortifications were strongest, where an attack might succeed. Lowe took the balloon Union up to 1,000 feet. From that height, he could see for miles. He could see Confederate camps. He could see artillery batteries. He could count regiments. He telegraphed everything to Union commanders on the ground. The Confederates saw the balloon. They fired at it, rifles, then artillery, but the balloon was too high. The bullets fell harmlessly. The artillery shells burst far below. Lowe stayed up for hours, methodically mapping Confederate positions. When he came down, he provided Union generals with detailed intelligence, exact locations, exact numbers, information they could never have obtained any other way. The generals were impressed. This balloon thing actually worked. But the real test came in the spring of 1862 during the Peninsula Campaign. The Peninsula Campaign. In March of 1862, General George McClellan launched the Peninsula Campaign. The Union Army would land on the Virginia Peninsula and advance on Richmond from the southeast. McClellan was cautious, obsessively cautious. He always thought the enemy outnumbered him. He always wanted more intelligence before attacking. Lowe's balloons were perfect for McClellan. They could tell him exactly where the Confederates were, exactly how many there were, exactly what they were doing. Lowe and his Balloon Corps accompanied the army down the peninsula. They made regular ascensions. They telegraphed reports. They became an essential part of Union intelligence gathering. At the Battle of Fair Oaks on May 31st and June 1st, 1862, Lowe made one of his most significant contributions. He was aloft in the Intrepid when he saw Confederate forces massing for an attack. He could see it happening in real time, regiments moving into position, artillery being brought forward, an attack was imminent. He telegraphed a warning to Union commanders. The warning gave the Union time to prepare. When the Confederate attack came, Union forces were ready. The Battle of Fair Oaks was a tactical draw, but without Lowe's warning, it might have been a Union disaster. But Lowe did more than just observe. He also directed artillery fire. This was revolutionary. For the first time in history, an observer in the air could watch where artillery shells landed and send corrections to the gunners. Aim left, aim right, increase range. You hit the target. Artillery batteries could now hit targets they could not even see. They could fire over hills, over forests, and still hit their targets because Lowe was spotting for them from above. Confederate soldiers hated the balloons. They called them the devil's machines. They felt exposed, vulnerable, like they were being watched by an all-seeing eye, which of course they were. The challenges, but operating balloons in a war zone was incredibly difficult. First, there was the weather. Balloons could not fly in high winds, they could not fly in rain, they could not fly at night. There were days, sometimes weeks, when conditions kept the balloons grounded. Second, there was the gas supply. Generating hydrogen in the field was slow, dangerous, and required large quantities of iron and sulfuric acid. These had to be transported by wagon. If the army moved quickly, the balloon corps could not keep up. Third, there was Confederate fire. While the balloons were usually too high for rifles and artillery, usually was not the same as always. Bullets occasionally hit the balloons. Artillery shells sometimes got close enough to damage the fabric. Every flight was dangerous. Fourth, and most importantly, there was military bureaucracy. Lowe was a civilian. He was not a soldier. He had no military rank. Some officers resented taking intelligence from a civilian showman. They thought balloons were gimmicks. They thought Lowe was wasting army resources, and Lowe constantly fought for funding. The army was reluctant to pay for the balloons, the gas generators, the transportation, the personnel. Lowe often paid expenses out of his own pocket and then fought to get reimbursed. It was exhausting, and it was about to get worse. The fall of the Balloon Corps. In the summer of 1862, McClellan's Peninsula Campaign failed. The army withdrew from the peninsula. There were new commanders, new priorities, and the new commanders did not value the Balloon Corps the way McClellan had. In 1863, the Balloon Corps was transferred from the control of the engineers to the quartermaster's department. This was a bureaucratic disaster. The quartermaster was responsible for supplies, not intelligence gathering. They did not understand the balloons. They did not know how to support them. Funding dried up. Lowe was not reimbursed for expenses. His pay was cut. The balloons started to deteriorate from lack of maintenance. Lowe appealed to anyone who would listen, but the army had lost interest. Balloon reconnaissance was expensive, it was logistically complicated, and most generals did not trust it anyway. In May of 1863, Thaddeus Lowe resigned in frustration. He had given 2 years of his life to military ballooning. He had revolutionized reconnaissance. He had proven that aerial observation worked, and the army had rewarded him with bureaucratic indifference and financial hardship. After Lowe left, the Balloon Corps lingered for a few more months under other aeronauts, but without Lowe's leadership and without proper support, it collapsed. By the summer of 1863, the Union Army Balloon Corps ceased to exist. The balloons were deflated, packed away, and forgotten. Some were sold as surplus. Some simply rotted in storage. America's First Air Force lasted less than 2 years. The Confederate response: what about the Confederates? Did they have balloons? They tried. The Confederacy recognized the value of aerial observation. They saw what Lowe's balloons could do. They wanted their own. But the Confederacy lacked the industrial capacity to build balloons on Lowe's scale. They lacked the materials. They lacked the gas generation equipment. They lacked the trained aeronauts. Still, they made one attempt. In the spring of 1862, Confederate forces in Richmond constructed a balloon. They called it the Gazelle. It was made from silk dresses donated by patriotic Southern ladies, hundreds of dresses sewn together into a patchwork balloon. The Gazelle was inflated with gas from the Richmond Gas Works. It made a few ascensions. Confederate observers reported on Union positions, but the Gazelle had problems. It was fragile, it leaked gas, and the Confederates had no way to reinflate it in the field. The balloon was transported by railroad. On one occasion, it was being moved by rail when Union forces captured the train. The Confederates lost their balloon to the enemy. They built one more, but it suffered the same fate. After that, the Confederacy gave up on balloons. The Union had the only effective balloon corps of the Civil War, and then they disbanded it. Legacy. The Union Army Balloon Corps was a failure, not a technical failure. The balloons worked, not a tactical failure. They provided valuable intelligence, but an institutional failure. The Army did not understand how to integrate this new technology. They did not value it, they did not support it, and so it died. But the idea did not die. The idea of aerial observation, of reconnaissance from the sky, of directing fire from above, that idea lived on. In the 1870s and 80s, European armies experimented with military balloons. The French, the Germans, the British. By World War I, every major army had balloon corps. Observation balloons were a standard part of warfare. They spotted for artillery. They watched enemy movements. They did exactly what Lowe had done 60 years earlier. And when airplanes were invented, they immediately became reconnaissance tools, aerial photography, spotting, intelligence gathering, everything Lowe had pioneered with balloons, but faster and more versatile. Thaddeus Lowe lived until 1913. He saw the Wright brothers fly. He saw airplanes adopted by militaries around the world. He saw aerial warfare become standard, but he received little recognition for his pioneering work. The balloon corps had been forgotten. Most people did not even know it had existed. Lowe went back to his inventions. He designed ice-making machines. He worked on gas production. He made and lost fortunes. He died in Pasadena, California at the age of 80, respected as an inventor but largely forgotten as a military innovator. Reflection. Friends, the story of the Balloon Corps is a story about how institutions resist innovation. Thaddeus Lowe proved that aerial reconnaissance worked. He demonstrated it over and over. Generals who used his balloons praised them. Intelligence gathered from balloons saved lives and won battles, and yet the army killed the Balloon Corps. Why? Because it did not fit. It was not infantry, not cavalry, not artillery. It required specialists. It required equipment. It required thinking differently about warfare. And most importantly, it was championed by an outsider, a civilian, a showman, someone who did not fit military culture. The army could have embraced the Balloon Corps. They could have expanded it. They could have trained more aeronauts, built more balloons, made aerial reconnaissance a permanent part of military operations. Instead, they starved it of resources and let it die. This is a pattern we have seen again and again in military history. The ironclad ships were resisted, the submarine was resisted, the airplane was resisted, the tank was resisted. Innovation always faces resistance, especially in institutions that pride themselves on tradition. But the innovators who persist change the world. Thaddeus Lowe did not live to see his balloons vindicated. But every military reconnaissance airplane, every surveillance satellite, every drone. They all trace their lineage back to a man in a wicker basket hanging beneath a silk balloon, looking down at an army and telegraphing what he saw. The technology explained. Let me take a moment to explain how Lowe's balloons actually worked, because the technology was remarkable for its time. The balloons themselves were made of silk fabric coated with linseed oil varnish to make them gas-tight. They were designed to be as light as possible while strong enough to withstand wind stress. The hydrogen generators were portable furnaces. Workers would load iron filings into large tanks, then add diluted sulfuric acid. The chemical reaction produced hydrogen gas, which was piped through hoses into the balloon. It took about 3 hours and several thousand pounds of iron and acid to inflate a balloon. The equipment weighed several tons and required multiple wagons to transport. The telegraph equipment was mounted in the basket. Insulated wire ran from the basket down to the ground. An operator in the basket could tap out messages in Morse code and they would be received instantly on the ground. Observers used telescopes and field glasses. They made sketches of what they saw. They estimated distances using trigonometry. They created detailed maps of enemy positions, and they did all this while swaying in a wicker basket 1,000 feet in the air with enemy bullets and artillery shells occasionally whizzing past. It required courage. It required technical skill. It required a steady hand and a strong stomach. The men of the Balloon Corps were pioneers of aerial warfare, and they deserve to be remembered. As we close today, I want you to picture that scene one more time. Dawn over Virginia. A silk balloon rising slowly into the morning sky. Thaddeus Lowe in the basket, telescope to his eye, watching the Confederate army spread out below him. He can see everything, every fortification, every regiment, every movement. He taps out a message on the telegraph. The information flows to Union commanders. They can plan, they can respond. They have an advantage the enemy cannot match. For 2 years, Lowe and his Balloon Corps gave the Union Army the gift of sight. The ability to see over the next hill, the ability to watch the enemy in real time, and then the army threw that gift away. But the idea survived. And 60 years later, in the skies over France, airplanes would do what Lowe's balloons had done. They would watch the enemy. They would direct artillery. They would give commanders the information they needed to win. Thaddeus Lowe did not live to see the Air Force. He did not live to see satellites and drones and all the technologies of modern aerial reconnaissance. But he started it. He proved it was possible. He showed the world that warfare would never be the same once humans could take to the sky. Lincoln's Air Force lasted less than 2 years, but its legacy lasts forever. Friends, if this story fascinated you, please share it. The story of the Balloon Corps deserves to be better known, and tell me in the comments. Had you heard of Thaddeus Lowe and the Balloon Corps before? What do you think about the Army disbanding such a successful program? I read every comment and I love learning from you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, keep their memory alive.